Comscore will tell you you're wrong about your October media buy around Thanksgiving. Nielsen will tell you that you were wrong next year. We needed something that gave us the speed to know if we were right or wrong last week.
I'm Eric Wilson, Managing Partner of Startup Caucus, the home of campaign tech innovation on the right. Welcome to the Business of Politics show. On this podcast, you're joining in on a conversation with entrepreneurs, operatives, and experts who make professional politics happen. Adam Wise, joining us today, is a Senior Vice President at National Media Research Planning and Placement, where he helps clients develop and execute paid advertising campaigns. In this episode, we dig into the challenge of measuring digital political ad spending, how to build media plans in a fragmented landscape, and what campaigns can do to better integrate their paid campaign into other efforts. Adam, we've heard from guests on previous episodes about advances in digital ad measurement tech like automated content recognition, ACR, and software to monitor ad libraries on Facebook. So why don't we yet have a comprehensive, reliable picture of digital ad spending in the political space?
That's a great question. I've been very fortunate to lead competitive media on 3 presidential campaigns and over a half dozen IEs at the NRSC and NRCC. And that's really been a major question for the past, 9 years of my existence. I mean, really, to get it, there's 2 ways in which we can do competitive media tracking in both the linear and the digital space. The first is the traditional, like human intel. We have reps that tell us information. That's how we get most of linear spending is, a rep from a group like Tegna or Katz will say, hey, Adam, your opponent just bought, 100 AK-47s. Would you like to buy 101? And that kind of arms race mentality leads us to create databases. And, we really haven't seen that enter the digital space just yet. I think mostly because of digital campaign practitioners not wanting that level of transparency, so that there hasn't been a business incentive for all of these digital vendors to start posting and distributing, orders the same way we've seen it in broadcast, cable, and radio. And that could change. I mean, it is a very fast way to get your digital budget allocation increased to see that somebody else is spending more. The second is a little bit more complicated. It's, signal-based intelligence. National media, well, before I was at it, actually in the 90s took, technology from essentially sonars that was used for tracking songs playing on the radio so that Michael Jackson and everybody else could figure out how many times their songs played. We were able to repurpose that to track digital ads in the 90s and the early aughts. Today that's become a lot more complicated, but digital is a lot different than TV. TV, you have 5 broadcast stations in a market and you have 200 plus markets. It's really easy for Kantar or I can add Impact to bring in a raw feed of all content playing on 5 broadcast stations and 200 plus markets. That's pretty easy. But as soon as you even jump from broadcast TV to cable, where you have 70 plus cable networks that are locally insertable and over 100 cable systems inside of a lot of these major DMAs, even cable, let alone digital, where you have so many different permutations of targeting, becomes really difficult to track. And there's really kind of 2 ways that we've tried to do it over the last, 4 to 5 years, and they're all imperfect. We've started to play around with crawlers, right? And that's kind of the first approach, creating search engines that would index websites multiple times per day. But those servers don't have...
And so you would see what ads are serving.
Yeah, because Google actually gets rid of ads when they're doing their crawling. So we created search engines that would do the opposite. But that gets you some display ads. It gets you some pre-roll ads. But the servers don't have a primary vote history. They don't have an age, an income, or a gender. So it really misses out on a lot. And it misses out on those premium, big screen TV environments. So really the new thing that we've started to see, and it's going to be interesting to see where it goes over the next couple of years with like Kantar buying Numerator, BI Science creating some new panels. We're starting to see this evolution of panels, right? Where somebody opts in kind of like they do for a Nielsen personal people meter panel, but everything that they do gets tracked. When they go somewhere on Chrome, boom, all those ads are captured. When they watch Hulu, all those ads are captured based upon, technology that sits on their TV. So that panel-based approach allows you to get more creative discovery, but still not perfect. And really where we've been this year, the last 2 years, is that at National Media, we built out our own 50 million household TV panel. We kind of coined it the Power Panel. And that allows us to take our ad library of every broadcast and cable ad on, House and Senate and gubernatorial races And whenever that ad plays on one of those TVs, whether it's Hulu, YouTube, Peacock, History Channel app, any of those apps, we can actually see the household in the panel where that ad played. And that's giving us some sense of volume and reach and frequency across broadcast and cable. But there's just so many permutations, right, of content and targeting. It's going to be a while. I think the big area where we'll really get a lot more transparency is going to be, digital practitioners saying, I want to see orders the same way the linear buyer sees it for broadcast, cable, and radio. I think that's really where it's going to change. And sorry, you started off with one of my favorite topics, so sorry to go so far into that one.
Well, so it sounds like the core of the problem is that our media diets as individuals are as unique as our fingerprints now, which is, you and I could live next door to each other, or even within the same household, and we don't even consume the same digital media. And so much of what we did to measure in the past was based on the idea of like, okay, you have 3 broadcast channels, maybe 20 cable channels, and a couple of newspapers. And now our habits are so unique to our identities that it's hard to monitor all of that.
100%. I mean, Comcast, I think they made an intern do the math on this, so I feel bad for the intern, but it's one of my favorite stats. If you looked at scripted content, not even including sports and news, it would take a voter watching TV all day, every day for an entire year to watch 80% of what was produced last year. And again, that's not including sports and news, which is the bulk of what people consume on live TV. So if you think about that level of content that exists out there and then the number of sellers, it becomes this really big problem to try and figure out all the places where you can insert it. And really, I think the true solution is going to be, not so much technology tracking everything, but it's going to be the sell side having an impetus for making it more available. Because as soon as somebody sees, we're already seeing it with the Google Transparency Report. You see that you're being outspent 5-1 on YouTube, you're going to increase your YouTube allocation for better or for worse. And that's something that I think will really be the trend that drives competitive forward in the digital space.
Do you think, Adam, that we might be hoping for something that doesn't really make sense in our digital media world, right? So we're trying to reverse engineer measurement from an analog world where we can say, oh, I know how many points, how many spots, exactly what went up on broadcast TV, radio, cable, and we're trying to force that into a digital world? Or do you think it's attainable?
It's a tough one. I think it's obtainable, but I honestly worry about what that world looks like, to be honest. One of the first lessons I learned at Engage from you, Rappridge, and Ruffini was that there's so many things that you can do in digital. If you're going to do it, make sure you do it well. Don't do things for the sake of doing it. It has to make sense. And my biggest fear about digital competitive is that we'll see a lot of reactionary based decisions. We'll do something because somebody else was doing it. We'll have, another meerkat election, if you will, right? as opposed to doing the things that make sense for the brand. Like, we don't have a lack of data about what voters are consuming. Like, I can take any RNC ID, match it up to a bazillion smart TVs and tell you everything that they watched and the apps that they used last week. I can do incredible targeting and real-time tracking off of that. So I don't have a lack of knowledge about what voters are consuming. What really, could happen if we had data about what other people are doing is we're going to ignore the data about what we need to be doing and do what somebody else is doing. And that's really my biggest fear in the long term about digital competitive.
So let's back up maybe to where we should have started, which is what would having a more complete picture of digital ad spending enable campaigns to do?
One of the big things that we see IEs do, right, is fill gaps. Is somebody not up on this cable network or not up in this broadcast market on this week? Having better digital competitive would allow IEs to do better blocking and tackling. It would allow sophisticated operators to really kind of see what smart things are being done by their opponent and, intercept those and counteract them. So there is some upside, but, again, I just kind of worry that it would become information overload and distract from the story about what we need to be doing and what we have to do to be successful.
And so one of the things that sort of prompted this conversation is we did not have a good picture of where digital spending went, because obviously with Facebook and Google, we have their transparency databases. Roku has some good databases, but again, that's just a small sliver of advertising. So I'm curious, based on the media plans that you helped develop this cycle, where did you see political advertisers making that split between, your traditional TV, so broadcast and cable, and streaming services? Can you give us like a rough percentage breakdown? Was it 60-40, 70-30? How'd that split work out?
And, caveat on this is that it really depends. A media plan in, Connecticut's going to be a lot different than a media plan in Arizona and California. Something in LA burbs is different than in Iowa. Everybody has different media habits. There's a lot of different things to do. There's not a one size fits all for media allocation, right?
Right, but why from geography to geography?
Oh, why from geography to geography? I guess it's more than just geography. It's also demographics, it's gender, it's income. There's a whole host of characteristics. You really have to look at your target and see if your target exists on broadcast, if they exist on cable, if they exist on radio, on Hulu. You have to look at where your voter is and go there. And every race and candidate is going to have a different coalition, and you have to look at that first. You know, as
So
a
just to
template.
go into one example, right? Like, so in Connecticut,
Yeah.
your option would be to have to buy like New York TV, right? So you might lean more on streaming. Is that what you're saying here?
Yeah, but also if you look at inside of the Fairfield media market, or I guess the Fairfield County, which is the county in Connecticut that goes into the New York City market, you also have a lot of swing voters that are 25 to 54 that have a household income of over 100K. They have college degrees. They skew away from linear TV and they actually skew towards digital audio. They skew towards streaming. So you kind of have to look at those people and say, who it is. You might also get a pullback saying you need to go after people without a college degree that are white, that are in this income bracket. And then all of a sudden, maybe, New York City broadcast makes sense because that's where your voters are. And despite the heavy expense of it, it's what you have to do because it's not efficient, but it's effective. So you really have to follow the voter and the consumption habits. But overall, as a template, I really like to be at least 80 to 20 or 70 to 30 linear to digital. And that actually ignores the largest medium in the country, right? If you look at broadcast or connected TV or cable or radio actually reaches more people 18 plus on a weekly basis than any of those mediums. The last Nielsen report, it was 88% weekly reach by radio. You have 80% weekly reach by TV and 50% weekly reach by connected TV. So, we also have to think about audio from that perspective because as things have changed, TV for the first time ever is actually skewing differently against the census. Historically, it's been very in line. Just basically crosshairs straight along with the census, but it's actually skewing lower income, wider, less education than the census population. Meanwhile, radio is still right on target with census and is actually, quite frankly, higher reach. Same thing with digital audio in a lot of cases, which is something that we often see forgotten from media plans.
Right. I want to ask you, we've been focused on the targeting and the placement. What role does creative play in that placement and targeting equation? How are you adjusting your plans based on the types of ads that you're being given by a campaign or a client?
Oh, it's a great question, and it's one that I think is not asked enough. I really view the media buyer as like the wide receiver and the creative person as the quarterback. If we get a really good throw, maybe, half the people that see the ad are persuaded to our side. Maybe a not so great ad is, 20%. No matter how effective the creative is or how far that toss goes down the field, it's our job to get it to the end zone. It's the media buyer's job to find enough people for that creative to work. And I think that question about reach, to win an election is too often forgotten by media plans. And that's really kind of a fun question to think about. And part of that is looking at the creative and not just placing it against swing voters or first party, modeled voters, is looking at the message and saying, who might this message work with? We had a candidate that actually had a background in forensic accounting, met his wife actually as forensic accountants. And, one of the things that the team said was, well, dang, we should just go ahead and let's suppress all the independent Democrats, but take a little bit of a wider ballot score, and let's go after everybody that's a CFO, an auditor, an actuary, anybody that might appreciate having somebody running for office that's not a lawyer, that has this kind of similar background to them. We had another one where a state actually governor raised the diesel tax. So instead of looking at party affiliation or ballot score, we actually yanked down everybody that owned a diesel car or a boat that used diesel fuel or leased commercial equipment. We kind of threw party affiliation aside and found people that were directly impacted by the message that we are speaking to see if we could move the needle a little bit more. And that's something that I think has been somewhat forgotten in media buying. And it's one of the reasons why we've actually spent a lot of time in national media hiring people. We hired the deputy data director from the RNC, a couple voter file builders from Data Trust. And we actually are sitting on, the credit union data. We're sitting on 3 voter files, 4 consumer files. national care practitioner database, business registries of where people work. And even, recently we were very fortunate to get the Campaign Tech Award for Innovation Digital Advertising a couple weeks ago. We were actually taking a 4 million person panel and then raw data from 2 DSPs to look at what people are reading. So, imagine, my favorite, topic that really popped up this year was, you have somebody that's not sure if they want to vote for, cost of living and inflation or Roe v. Wade. So we created kind of what we called the like Roe deal seeker. It was an Aldi shopping, high income household, reading about, essentially the overturn of Roe, but also very interested in, using coupons and seeking out deals in their lives. And, we tried to deliver them a message that basically said, hey, you need to focus on cost of living. And it was very aligned with that message. So it's, as you can tell, it's something that I care a lot about and we spend a lot of time thinking about, but it's something that I think has been forgotten because you have all of these great creative practitioners, like we're very fortunate to work with, Brad Todd, Chris Mottola, Casey Phillips, Convergence with Mike Shields and Rob Sims. Like all these people give us their artwork, right? And, us taking a second to say, who could this artwork apply to other than just swing voters, I think is a very important thing to think about.
You're listening to the Business of Politics show. I'm speaking with Adam Wise from National Media about digital advertising measurement and placement and plans and all things media today. Adam, our media landscape is highly fragmented. What are some strategies for media planning that overcomes that and makes sure that you're hitting the right reach and frequency across platforms for your target audience?
My absolute favorite topic. I mean, it's the traditional notion has been buy 1,000 GRPs, A35 plus, you're good. You hit 100% of people 10 times. In reality, it's not that. It's more like 30% reach 34 times. And, I'm very fortunate to be on the advisory board for a pretty cool company called Samba TV. And they did an interesting study last year looking at the top 10 corporate advertisers in America. And they looked at all the impressions. So we're talking Geico, Coke, Pepsi, McDonald's, et cetera. And 95% of their linear TV impressions went to 46% of the US population. That means half the country is getting over 100 ads a day. The other half are getting 7. So if you have this ability to reach more people than your opponent, have your creative convert more people to your side, media buying literally can make the difference. But yet, we don't spend a lot of time thinking about that. And something that we've been very fortunate to do this year for both the major party IEs and for some of the more competitive races was we actually devised an ACR panel, 50 million households, and we're tracking every broadcast cable and connected TV impression. And we can also layer on pixels to do things on mobile and digital audio. But what that allows us to do is, ComScore will tell you you're wrong about your October media buy around Thanksgiving. Nielsen will tell you that you were wrong next year. We needed something that gave us the speed to know if we were right or wrong last week. So every week we could start to see, the unique reach and frequency for every advertiser in the market. Did our buys or changes fix anything? But then we could also create a new audience on who was missed. So we could say, okay, we reached 41% of swing voters in, the Norfolk market. What does the other 60% consume? And we would see all the cable networks, the day parts, the app usage, the broadcast shows, and we could be smart. And we were actually able to, in a lot of cases, in like the DC media market, for instance, we were outspent by a, multi-year incumbent, 3-1, but we outreached her 3-1 with swing voters in the district because she was buying the DC market as a whole. So there really is an opportunity. And that's, I think directly at your question, number one, having technology that gives you a better sense of unique reach and frequency. And it's also a diversification of assets. It's marginal reach stops increasing efficiently on broadcast at about 500 points. Yet we routinely go ahead of that. Cable people are fixated, like 65% of ampersand spending is on, which is the main local cable route, on the top 5 cable networks. They produce high ratings, but it's going beyond those top 5 and finding niche places where your voters exist. Cable and pay TV is decreasing. It's at the lowest level it's been since 1993. But there are people that have cable that all they watch are cable. You might have somebody that exists with 60%, 70% of their time spent on media each week on NFL Network or on CNBC. So how do we start to move away from, efficient media buying optimization to effective, right? How do we find those cohorts that aren't exposed? Billy Beane with, when he kind of went beyond cricket math, right, with baseball, one of the more simple metrics that he created was the slugging coefficient. Like we used to treat hits all the same way, but a double was worth, well, double. So why we don't think about reaching those lower to reach consumers as a double, I really think is a place for a lot of progress. Like even moving away from our Nielsen data or from our ACR data to Nielsen, if you look at the entire voting population of the United States into terciles, like three groups, right? And you buy 1,000 points. The top 30% of your audience, or 33%, is getting 1,500 points. The middle third is getting about 800, so pretty close to what you forecasted. And then the bottom third is getting 40 points a week. So rapid under acceleration. We have to spend a lot more effort isolating those segments and planning around those segments, knowing that we're going to deliver against the heavier consumers of media who are, put in the time spent. They're spending over 30 hours a week watching TV versus that bottom third, which is watching 1 to 2 hours a week.
I think one of the other things that offers campaigns a real opportunity is to more comprehensively integrate their paid media campaigns into what they're actually doing as a campaign, because I think you often notice this divorce, if you will, or a gulf between here's what the campaign is talking about on the stump in earned media, what they're doing on social and at events, and then what's going on the media campaign. It's almost like they're run by two different teams, and sometimes they are. But what can campaigns do to better integrate those two sides and get them talking?
I put into two groups. The first one is how can media help with offline contact, and then how can media data help with offline contact. Today is Georgia runoff day, so just doing a 2-year flashback to 2020 in that runoff, Democrats spent $12 million on linear media promoting ballot mechanic spots. By December 5th of the last runoff, there were 6% of voters that had voted in the runoff that hadn't voted in the general election, and the majority were non-white. So there was very clearly a concentrated effort by Democrats. And actually, one of the firms that was hired by Warnock was actually Mike Fuse, who did a lot of the API targeting for Obama, to go out and use media to turn people out to the polls, to create social utility, a sense of urgency, to get those low and mid propensity voters turned out to a special election. Conversely, there were $0 spent on that same notion. And if you look back at the spending this year, it's kind of the same thing. Every Warnock spot, every Dem spot ends with a call to action about, we need you one more time. So I am a firm believer that paid media can do more than just persuade. It can also motivate and turn people out. And I'm very curious to see how that can work in the future. But the second is really, we're talking about how fragmented media is, but everybody has an address. We have pretty good addresses in the voter file. And, almost 3/4 of the US population, we have high reliable cell phones. One of the things that I think is really promising when you look at essentially the revolution we've had with embedded video text. I can put a 30-second HD video spot into a text message and send it out to a bunch of people. It's not cheap, but if I know the right people that are missed by my TV campaign, it's a very effective way for me to find them. If you look at the Phoenix media market, buying 1,000 gross rating points, A35 plus gets you, and also doing about 200 points of digital, gets you to about 70% reach of swing voters in the Phoenix market. To go from 70 to 71%, in media terminology, that's called a cost per reach point. The cost to go 1% more reach of a target is $35,000. If I could find the people I needed to find with embedded video text, we're talking a couple $100 to send them and it go from 70 to 71% reach. So one of the things we really used our 15 million person panel for. We also ran 1.3 million survey responses over the past couple of years. We've created 50 media scores for every voter in the country. So I can tell you essentially who is unreachable. And we've backed this up with validation on live callers and also matching it up to known data. So it's not just modeled, it's actually matched up in a lot of cases to known data. So I can send a text message to the 20% or 30% of my audience that is consuming 1 hour of TV a day. And maybe that 1 hour is on Netflix, so I can't reach them. So how do we start to make embedded video texts, door knocking, all of these tools work together? I think is looking at essentially a media voter file for somebody to say, cool, this is Eric Wilson. He consumes podcasts. He watches Hulu. I'm just guessing. I don't think I reached him last week. How can I find him? Well, I have a door knocker in the area.
So sort of taking those rifle shots where you've missed with your sort of broader targeting. And I think this brings out one of the really interesting, I'll call it the curse of digital, which is that we can measure everything. And so digital marketing gets scrutinized so much more heavily than traditional media. But I think there's some really interesting ways, and you've already mentioned some of them, that technology is helping us more accurately measure legacy media like TV and radio. Give us an overview of what you're using there right now.
We spend so much time scrutinizing viewability and ad fraud for digital, yet for TV, it's given completely the benefit of the doubt. Half of Republican media buying agencies don't have a Nielsen license. They take the ratings provided from the sell side. And I think something that's really important to understand on this is that we don't walk into a TV station.
Sorry, Adam, unpack that for us. What's the difference there? What's the sell side and what's Nielsen?
Yeah, so sell side would be like a TV station, right? Okay. And Nielsen would be a third-party measurement provider of this TV show reached X number of people or this percent of people. So when I walk into as a linear media buyer to a TV station, I don't say give me 1,000 gross rating points, which is kind of the goal, right? I say give me 500 spots that I, as a media buyer, using Nielsen data or ComScore data or ratings provided to me from the TV station, I am going to create a projection that those 500 spots will be 1,000 gross rating points. But sadly, half of media buying agencies on the Republican side of the aisle don't have a Nielsen license. They don't have a ComScore license either. They take the ratings provided by the sell side, who is going to tell the most advantageous story possible. I'm not accusing anything of malintent. It's just a person doing their job to advocate for their property by, picking the best book during sweeps week, and basically finding the most advantageous possible rating. When we went back and looked at ratings provided to us from a TV station versus our own internal projections, the stations inflated their ratings by 27%. That means 27%, essentially the equivalent of digital ad fraud, right? So if you're going to buy 1,000 rating points and you take a station rating without having your own Nielsen license, you could be getting 700 rating points instead of 1,000. And that's one of the most untalked about things in media buying because there's just no scrutiny.
And that's just because they're looking at historical data rather than the more up to the minute data.
It's how you choose to project your ratings, right? So most of the time internally we'll take 3 months, we'll average it out, we'll use a little bit of our own experience and expertise, right? We place $1 billion every about 2.5 years. So we have buyers that have been doing this for 2+ decades. They have a pretty good sense what the ratings actually are, what Nielsen books to use that are pretty accurate. And then we go back and we post and we check. But if you don't have your own Nielsen license to get your own ratings, to pick your own books, to create your own averages, to figure out what a spot accrues from reach, you're just taking essentially the sell side, the station, saying, hey, I'll charge you $100 for the spot. I think it's going to do, a 5 rating. Maybe that spot isn't a 5, it's actually a 2 or a 3. So that becomes, essentially, it's distorting your reality of how many impressions you're actually getting.
Well, Adam, we obviously have a really big challenge around measurement and ad tracking. And certainly there's a very big problem and a big solution out there. But are there some more narrow opportunities that you'd like to see a startup tackle for some of our listeners who may be thinking about helping you out with some of these challenges?
I mean, honestly, I'm somewhat selfishly, I would love to see somebody create a tool for opting out of ActBlue and WhenRed. Mostly, how to get out of a lot of the text messages because the saturation is getting so high. And it seems like a silly thing to say, but if you're a House candidate and you're trying to fundraise using text messaging, meanwhile, all your potential donors are getting 20 text messages a day from the former president of the United States or from some other, PACs, it's very hard for you to cut through. I think the ability to have people who have donated once or twice, get less text messages, collect data at the same time you're doing it. Axiom, one of the main consumer data warehouses, actually created a website where you could go, essentially fix all the erroneous data about you, right?
Oh,
and
really?
that data would be collected and it would be for your own betterment. But I really do think some tool to help decrease the volume of unsolicited text messages so that more meaningful messages can cut through because SMS and PTP really is powerful. I think that could be a very interesting, slightly untraditional opportunity. And, I think the only other one that really comes to mind is I've been surprised that somebody hasn't created a polling co-op to consolidate polling responses. So we can create a bigger, essentially a data trust, but for polling. Those would be kind of the two ideas that come to mind.
Oh, interesting. So I hadn't thought about that before, but the fundraising communication, whether that's via email or SMS, is diminishing your ability to get a message through on the paid campaign side.
100%. And also, too, we're seeing a massive candidate spending disparity. If you look at Cook toss-up races this year, the average Democratic candidate media buy was double a Republican. They leapfrogged us in 2018, and it's continued to grow. And when you have a candidate with more money, that goes way further, right? So, on average, this year was less. It was about 26% candidate dollars went further than issue dollars on linear media. But normally it's been over 40%. So 2x actually becomes, a 2.5 to 3x advantage on impressions on linear media. And if we can do anything to cut the noise so that our candidates, especially at the House level, can get their text messaging to cut through so that they can raise more small dollar donors, that's going to help me with media budgets big time.
Well, thanks to Adam Weiss for a great conversation. You can learn more about him in our show notes. If today's episode made you a little bit smarter or gave you something to think about, all we ask is that you share it with a friend or colleague, and you look like a genius in the process. Remember to subscribe to the Business of Politics show wherever you get your podcasts, and that way you'll never miss an episode. You can also learn more and view past episodes at businessofpoliticspodcast.com. With that, I'll say thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.